A couple months ago, I read an article by science journalist Shayla Love called How a Rare Disorder Makes People See Monsters. It's estimated that as much as 2% of humans have difficulty distinguishing faces to varying degrees. Scientists call that condition prosopagnosia. At one end of the spectrum, maybe all people with dark hair or people of the same height all look alike. Their faces all blend together and become indistinguishable. At the other end of the spectrum, people are completely indistinguishable, so that a person with prosopagnosia can't tell the difference between a random stranger and their own mother. They could be completely different from each other, different shapes, different sizes, different skin or hair color. Everyone is indistinguishable. And there's a rare variation of the condition called prosopometamorphopsia, PMO for short. And PMO is usually caused by a traumatic injury, which can take years to manifest itself in the brain. When a person with PMO first looks at someone, they see reality, they see what most of the rest of us see. But after a couple of minutes, or even after a couple of seconds in extreme cases, their brains change what they think they see. Usually, one side of the face will morph visually into something distorted, even monstrous. Some of the interviewees in the article talked about how shocking it was the first time it happened to them, watching the faces of loved ones appear to slowly melt on one side. There's no cure, there's no treatment. Most deal with the condition by simply not looking directly at people. Can you imagine going through life not looking at people? And many of the folks living with the condition talk about how easy it would be to mistake PMO for some kind of religious vision. In history, when many believed that monsters and shapeshifters roamed among us perpetrating evil, a person with PMO could have mistaken their neurological condition for special insight into the true nature of people. A kind of horrible gift. With an understanding of the workings of the human nervous system and the extreme rarity of the condition, it makes sense someone might have such a delusion. Because ultimately, we all want to see people as they truly are, especially when they aren't very nice. It's a kind of self-protection. Do you remember what happened in Charlottesville, Virginia in August of 2017? In a rally they called Unite the Right, bearing guns, torches, Confederate flags, and Nazi gear, white nationalists descended on the campus of the University of Virginia, chanting horrible things like, "You will not replace us," "Blood and soil," "Russia is our friend," "Hail Trump." They beat pro-democracy protesters with batons, and one of them gunned his muscle car into the crowd, killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. People were shocked by the incident. It seemed like it came out of left field for a lot of folks. But what shocked me was the number of people I heard say things along the lines of, "Those men all looked so clean cut and handsome. I wouldn't expect them to behave like that." I heard that a lot. And there's so much to unpack there. I can't even begin to get to it all. But making that kind of observation says a lot about the advantages that we afford to attractive people. It's weird. Plus, I think we sometimes kind of expect pretty people to be able to recognize the privileges that come with their looks. Weirder still is that somehow we expect bad people to look bad, right? It's like we believe the hatred that lives in a person's heart should be embodied, should manifest itself in their faces. Like a guy chanting Nazi hate slogans is supposed to look like a big evil cartoon character with a warty, crooked nose, a permanent scowl, maybe even horns or a forked tail. At the very least, the bad people should be covered with scary tattoos, especially on their faces, and dressed in black or camouflage. They should give us clues, right? It's like they're not supposed to have neat haircuts. They're not supposed to be wearing crisp khakis and pressed white dress shirts. We tend to forget that SS soldiers looked and dressed like that during Hitler's reign of terror. We want people who behave badly to look like pointy-headed cretins because that would make it so much easier. And it puts all of the blame on our social ills on them and removes responsibility from ourselves. We're so different from them that we look different. And the reality is that when we hear about behavior we find abhorrent, we tend to rely on stereotypes. We imagine people looking menacing with the tats and the broken teeth and dirty clothes. The problem is that it otherizes people. It makes them something other than us. In extreme cases, it makes them something other than human. There's a lot of that going around. The extreme right sees the left as agents of Satan working against the laws of God for their own good. I've been called, directly and indirectly, a baby killer, a sex trafficker, a Satan worshiper, and a perpetrator trying to turn boys into girls. And the left sees the right as hate-filled, unable to abide anyone or anything different from themselves, willfully ignorant, threatened by the very existence of human diversity and need. Gun-toting thugs. They're called narcissists, monsters, and of course perpetrators against women, queer people, immigrants, and the poor. And most of our perceptions are born out of fear. What if they win? What if they get control? The stakes these days are high. No wonder so many people were surprised that the Unite the Right guys were so clean cut. So we all tend to see others, especially when we don't like their beliefs, as a kind of monster. I know when I see a lawn filled with political signs that are the opposite of my own beliefs, I'm surprised when I notice a grandmotherly type outside tending to her flowers, even though I know better. But it wasn't always like that. Jimmy Carter, the 39th president of the United States, turned 100 on Tuesday, making him the longest-lived president in U.S. history. So, of course, he was on the news a lot this week, and I heard and read a few news stories about him and the occasion. While everyone was singing his praises, what stood out to me is that he is still universally loved and respected. People talked about his reliability and his compassion, but mostly about his humility. Even people who didn't vote for him then, even people who identify as conservatives now, everyone agrees that as a president, he had a monumental job with record-breaking inflation, especially fuel prices, which make our current situation look minor. While Vietnam was falling apart in the aftermath of our war, conflict escalated in the Middle East, the Iran hostage crisis lingered. We were still adjusting to the aftermath of Watergate. It was the beginning of the incredible downward spiral of confidence in the presidency and our government in general. Jimmy Carter feels unique among the politicians of today for me, because so many of them now seem really eager to lie, to get their way, or to simply make a point. And he's different from politicians who share anecdotes from their own lives in order to deflect attention away from the issues that could affect their relatability. He's different from politicians who treat each other like monsters. What makes Jimmy Carter stand out still is his capacity for self-reflection. Even when it hurt his electability, he was honest about his shortcomings, his prejudices, even his self-doubt. He made himself personally vulnerable through his capacity for public atonement. This week, Jews here and around the world are celebrating the new year 5785 during the High Holy Days, which began Wednesday night with Rosh Hashanah, continuing through Yom Kippur and Sukkot, ending with Simchat Torah. And the High Holy Days aren't about celebrating, as David said, so much as they are about atoning. Traditionally, the focus of the time is on acknowledging one's own shortcomings, failures, or sins, and repenting for them. More liberal or progressive denominations of Judaism focus on setting intentions for the new year ahead with the hopes of doing better. My feeling, and this is just a feeling, is that probably most Jews, to varying degrees, probably do a little of both, atoning and looking ahead. After all, how can anyone set meaningful intentions without looking back at least a little and determining what could have been done differently? And if we just atone without setting intentions to do better, then repenting is nothing more than an empty symbolic gesture. Like the wolf in the story I told earlier. The first time I told that story was way back in 2014. I told it to a group of children as part of a service about the death penalty in the prison industrial complex. The lessons that I got from it then were really different. I talked about how there are two sides to every story, and nobody should ever be judged solely on the worst thing they've ever done, because there is good in all of us, even when it's hard to find. It just seems so naive now. The wolf doesn't seem like a regular guy just lacking a little self-knowledge. He seems like a metaphor for all the despotic leaders of the world, pitting against each other the people he's supposed to be leading, dehumanizing those he considers his enemies, dragging his country into a war they don't want to fight, while claiming to be the victim himself. Let me be really clear about this. Vladimir Putin, Benjamin Netanyahu, Donald Trump, and other authoritarian leaders all have a lot of blood on their hands and no apparent ability for self-reflection or atonement for their sins against humanity in the name of their political agendas. They don't represent their people, as we hold ourselves and each other accountable for our ordinary sins, the regular shortcomings that are the result of human frailty. We atone while they make excuses. But there are two lessons from that story that I still take away from the story of the wolf. First, it's too easy to see others as bad, inexcusable monsters, while we justify our own bad behaviors as unavoidable, natural, or somehow outside of our own control. The second lesson is that explaining or even seeking forgiveness for hurtful behaviors without acknowledging our own failures and making a concerted effort to change them really is just a bunch of empty words. And when we make excuses for ourselves while blaming others is exactly the thing that makes others see us as monsters. All of the interviewees in that article about PMO said the same thing using different words. They all wish that they could see people as they are and not as distortions. There's nothing they or their doctors can do to change their neurology. But for most of us, our perceptions are mutable. We have the power to change them. And most of the time, it starts by looking within ourselves, honestly. As we move closer to the election that promises to affect the future of not only our nation, but democracy itself, may we all engage in a little self-reflection and honesty and use our expression to set intentions for moving forward toward the global community that we want to live in. Our honesty with ourselves, our desire to see one another as we are, is what will save us in the long run, even when our leaders fail us. Please rise now. And remain standing through the end of the service if you can.